We're coming on the air with breaking news that could impact hundreds of people charged in connection with the January 6th attack on the Capitol and potentially former President Trump. The Supreme Court just ruled in favor of one of the rioters on January 6th over a charge of obstruction of an official proceeding. This decision is set to have a sweeping impact on hundreds of prosecutions, but this could especially impact Donald Trump after he cited the case in his bid to obtain presidential immunity in the election interference case against him. Laura Jarrett is by my side here. You've been through some of these pages. Dig a little deeper for us.
Okay, so here we go. So we have here a defendant in one of the January 6 cases who has been charged with a federal obstruction-related statute. He wanted the narrowest possible interpretation of that statute so that his conduct wouldn't be covered. Prosecutors have tried to stretch the statute as much as possible so that it would sweep in Mr. Fisher as well as many other defendants. And today, the High Court, in a divided opinion, has sided with Mr. Fisher, narrowing the statute. It does not mean all of the January 6 cases are going to be tossed out, but it does put the issue back in the lower court's hands to determine whether his conduct now meets this new rule. So we're going to continue to sift through this and understand exactly the scope of what is and isn't going to be covered. But we should mention here, it is not a complete ideological shift. You actually see Justice Jackson joining some of the conservative colleagues in this, and it was something that had come at oral argument. What was the intent of this statute that was passed after the Enron scandal? And the idea was that they were trying to sweep in more conduct, but it was really about document destruction. And when you think about what happened on January 6th, people storming the Capitol, everyone remembers those images and the violence, but nobody really associates it primarily with document destruction in the same way as you associate something like a white-collar crime like Enron. And so that's sort of where the debate had been here. And the Chief Justice explaining here that the statute is only going to apply to acts that affect the integrity or availability of evidence. So does Fisher's conduct on that day affect that? We're going to have to wait and see. So it's going to continue to play out. But again, as you mentioned, Lester, the former president was also charged with this federal obstruction statute. His application is very different. He was not accused of storming the Capitol like Mr. Fisher and so many others. But of course, given how they have narrowed this federal obstruction statute, of course, he will try to use it to further delay the proceedings in his own case.
Which leads me to Kristen, Welker, moderator and Meet the Press, who joins us here. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So how does this play out of the overall spectrum of the election?
It's a great question, Lester, because we have seen former President Trump try to capitalize on these cases that Laura is talking about, including the one that we just got from the Supreme Court. And he has vowed to pardon some of those who rioted, who have been charged, who've pleaded guilty to their actions on January 6th. He's trying to energize his base of supporters with that type of language. We saw that last night at the debate. By the way, we've spent so much time talking about this debate, the fact that President Biden had what so many have referred to as a halting performance last night. But former President Trump spent time talking about those rioters, the people who stormed the Capitol that day. And so the question is, how will that play, politically speaking? Will that alienate independent voters? Will that alienate some of the voters that former President Trump would need in these key battleground states if he wants to win? Right now, polls show that he does have a narrow lead in battleground states and nationally within the margin of error. But this is one of those issues, Lester, that for people in the suburbs, people who are in those swing states and swing counties does not play well, who are watching all of this unfold very quickly, again, may be effective at energizing his base. And the big outstanding question, what Laura refers to, how might this impact the case that former President Trump is facing? That remains to be seen. But again, politically speaking, he has tried to use this as a weapon.
Let's bring Danny Cevallos, NBC legal analyst, here into this conversation. Could this potentially mean new trials for some of these defendants?
Yes, it could. But under these facts, what happened procedurally is that the case has now been returned to the district court's decision on it, which concluded that this was not a valid application of this statute. This entire case could be boiled down to one word, and that word is otherwise, and how we interpret that word otherwise, because federal law says you can't tamper with documents to impair their use at a congressional proceeding. That's not the charge here. The charge here is the next line in the federal law, which is or otherwise interferes basically with that congressional proceeding. And that's what this battle was. Does otherwise impair mean any way in the world that you could possibly obstruct a congressional proceeding? Or is it defined by the line that came immediately before it, which speaks of tampering with documents, with evidence? And the majority concluded that no, otherwise cannot be read that broadly. But here's how close a call it was. Justice Barrett's dissenting opinion reaches the opposite conclusion about the use of the word otherwise. And she says that, well, look, Congress does what Congress wants. And if Congress wanted to use the word otherwise and give this law this sweeping reach that could cover almost anything that obstructs a congressional proceeding, then that was their prerogative and that was their choice. So it's a really interesting look. And as Laura pointed out, this is split and fractured among ideological lines. You saw Justice Jackson joining with the majority, but ultimately, this comes down to a very interesting interpretation of criminal law, whether Congress has the power to simply use the word otherwise and cover such a giant swath of criminal activity.
All right, let me bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson. She's in Atlanta, where last night Mr. Trump participated in the first presidential debate of this election season. Hallie, I understand you're getting some reaction already from Republican lawmakers to this court decision.
That's right, specifically from Congressman Jim Jordan, Lester, obviously a close ally of former President Trump. So to the point that Danny is making about the power of Congress here and that question mark, you have the congressman praising this decision, saying that, in fact, it is essentially a victory, an affirmation, he says, of the rule of law, and a reminder, in his words, that Congress, not, quote, out-of-control prosecutors, writes the law here. So this is some of the first reaction we're getting to this significant case now coming in from the Supreme Court, significant for all the reasons you've laid out and also for the political impact and backdrop as well. New polling from several months ago suggests that the majority of Americans, about 70%, think that the punishments against January 6th defendants, people who went into the Capitol, stormed the Capitol on that day, are either fair or not harsh enough. Now, obviously, those numbers are not the same when you look strictly along partisan lines, but it gives you a sense of where the country is on this moment. And we can talk about here, as we are in Atlanta, fresh off that first presidential general election debate, where former President Trump's head is at on this, because we know even last night he suggested that January 6th was a time where the world had respect for America. He downplayed the impact of the insurrection. He has previously called January 6th defendants hostages, warriors, etc. Now, keep in mind, right, that Jack Smith, the prosecutor bringing the federal case against former President Trump, previously argued that, in fact, whatever the Supreme Court decided on Fisher should not have an impact on the case against Donald Trump, specifically moving forward because of that fake electors scheme. So there's still a lot we're waiting on here. We are out to the Trump campaign for any comment on this, and we'll let you know the second that we get it, Lester.
Hallie, thanks. And speaking of waiting, Laura, we understand the court now is going to close up for this session next Monday.
And it's going to close with a bang.
With a bang. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so they have quite a bit of work left to do. Obviously, a lot happened today. I don't want to discount what they've done here in the Fisher case, and obviously there were some other cases that were quite considered. But the one that everybody has been sort of waited with bated breath is, of course, the one that will determine the fate of the former president's case in Washington, D.C. for election interference. It's the case about whether he's immune or not from federal prosecution. And because it's the court's last day, we therefore know that the immunity decision has to come on that day. We obviously don't know who's writing it. We know nothing about it. But just sort of now knowing which day it's coming is even news.
And to be clear, this has to do with what acts were official or not.
Exactly. He has made sort of broad arguments about blanket presidential immunity, shielding him completely, although his lawyer sort of walked that back. Obviously, Jack Smith tried to get the Supreme Court to weigh in much earlier so that the case could actually proceed to trial and be completed before the November election. But given the late date that we're now saying this is going to come out on July 1st, it just seems even more unlikely. We haven't seen the opinion, but it seems even more unlikely that the timing will work out so that it could actually be completed before November 5th.
Kristen, you want to weigh in there?
Absolutely. I mean, Lester, one of the big X factors of this entire campaign has been these legal cases that former President Trump has been facing. 4 different felony cases. And he was just, of course, convicted of 34 felony counts. And his legal team's strategy from the very beginning has been delay, delay, delay. And the various scenarios that Laura lays out that we are potentially watching for on Monday. And again, we'll have to see how it unfolds. With the exception of the court siding with Jack Smith, it is all but certain that that case will be delayed, that the case involving January 6th and obstruction of justice, that the case involving the documents, we've seen that case get stretched out. The case in Georgia has been delayed as well. So it is very likely that the only case that we will see the conclusion of is the case in Manhattan. How has that impacted him politically? Not very much. We did see initially some polls tighten in the wake of those initial verdicts that were handed out, and yet they have narrowed in the wake of that. And so it's just extraordinary. This big X factor is winding up so far not to have a massive impact on this election.
Well, thank you all for now. That concludes this NBC News special report. We'll have much more on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up when I see you tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.